They walked away without a word, no apology, no explanation, just silence, like none of it ever mattered, like all the nights you held them through their fears could be erased with a single decision. And what did they leave you with? Confusion, a head full of questions, a heart full of noise, and the kind of pain that doesn't scream. It whispers in quiet moments and breaks you in stillness. You wanted clarity, not for closure, but for peace. You weren't chasing them. You were chasing understanding. You thought if they could just be honest, you could finally breathe again. But they didn't give you that. They gave you distance, silence, indifference. And you started thinking maybe you were the problem. Maybe you were too much, too intense, too loving. Maybe if you had just held back, they'd have stayed. But here's the truth. You weren't too much. They were never ready. They didn't know how to handle a soul that deep, a heart that loyal, a mind that actually listened. They mistook your emotional honesty for weakness. But what they'll never understand is that the silence they gave you, you turned it into power. That unanswered message, you turned it into muscle. That blocked number, you turned it into boundaries. That lonely night, you turned it into clarity. Now you don't reach out. You don't explain. You don't beg. Because silence isn't just absence, it's self-respect. And that silence, that's the only closure they'll ever get. I want you to drop this affirmation in the comments if you're ready to let go with strength, not rage. I gave love. Now I give myself peace. Number 1, they didn't break you. They revealed your strength. They didn't break you. They just woke up the part of you they never bothered to understand. When they walked away, they thought they were ending something. What they didn't realize is they were starting something else, something they couldn't control. They thought you'd crumble, lose yourself, beg for answers. But all they really did was give you the space to remember who you were before they tried to rewrite you. At first, you did question everything. You looked at yourself through their rejection. You tried to find the flaw they must have seen. You thought maybe if you'd said less, felt less, wanted less, they would have stayed. But then silence did something they never could. It told the truth. It revealed your resilience. It brought your attention back inward. You stopped chasing validation. You stopped rehearsing apologies you never owed. You stopped trying to decode a goodbye that never came. And the more silent it got, the more honest you became, with yourself, with your wounds, with your worth. You didn't need closure, you needed courage, and that courage was always there. It was just buried under the noise of trying to be enough for someone who didn't even know how to receive love. You used to think the silence was punishment. Now you understand. It was protection, a redirection, a line in the sand between who you were and who you're becoming. Because anyone who walks away from real, grounded love without explanation, without care, without basic respect, was never built to stay. And people like that don't deserve your breakdown. They deserve your absence, not out of revenge, but out of preservation. Because you no longer offer explanations where they offered none. You no longer lower your standards just to keep someone in your life who never showed up fully. You've turned the wound into wisdom, the echo into discipline, the heartbreak into hunger. You're not broken. You're just done bleeding for people who didn't even notice you were hurting. You've learned to walk through silence like a soldier. You've learned to breathe in stillness and exhale self-worth. You've learned to sit with the pain, not as a prisoner, but as its master. Epictetus once said, "Difficulties show men what they are." And now, you've seen exactly what you are. Not broken, not abandoned, rebuilt, reinvented, untouchable. Comment this if you've stopped proving your worth. Their absence didn't break me, it built me. Number 2, they mistook your peace for passivity. They mistook your silence for weakness, your peace for surrender, your calm for indifference. But what they didn't realize is that not every storm makes noise. Some storms rebuild from the inside out. You didn't scream when they left. You didn't argue your worth. You didn't throw desperate words into an empty space, hoping they'd echo back. You just got quiet. And in that quiet, they assumed they won. They mistook your stillness for defeat. But that silence? It wasn't empty. It was sacred. While they looked for noise to validate their choices, you were quietly rebuilding the foundation they tried to shake. You were reflecting, not reacting. You were healing, not hiding. You weren't passive. You were patient. They were addicted to drama, addicted to emotional highs and lows, to chaos dressed up as connection. So when you didn't play that game, when you didn't beg, when you didn't fall into the spiral of response, they felt nothing. And in their world, silence equals apathy. But in your world, silence was discipline. It was you choosing peace over performance, stillness over chasing. You stopped explaining because you realized real love doesn't need to be justified. It shows up, it stays, it nurtures. And anything less than that isn't love. It's noise. You started realizing how much of your energy had been used trying to be understood by someone who only listened to their own fears. You remembered who you were before you began translating your calm into a language they could tolerate, and you made a decision to no longer shrink your peace to make someone else feel seen. They expected you to return, to text one more time, to show up even after being ignored. But peace doesn't chase confusion, and peace never negotiates with chaos. You're not mad, you're just not available anymore. Your silence isn't a strategy, it's a boundary, a declaration that your soul no longer entertains instability, that your life no longer has room for anything inconsistent, unclear, or careless. Marcus Aurelius said, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." So you chose to be better. Not louder, not colder, just better. And now they're sitting in the echo of your absence, realizing that the silence they thought meant nothing was everything. Number 3, they never said goodbye, but you still let go. They left without a word, no explanation, no final conversation, just vanished, as if everything you went through didn't deserve a proper ending. You replayed it all in your mind. What went wrong, what you could have done differently, what you should have said. You held on, thinking maybe the silence was temporary, that eventually they'd reach out, that something would come to make sense of the chaos they left behind. But that message never came. The apology never arrived. The explanation never showed up. And somewhere in the middle of that emptiness, you changed. You stopped pacing around the same memories. You stopped opening your phone hoping their name would appear. You stopped bleeding for a connection that already flatlined, not because you suddenly felt nothing, but because you realized waiting was costing you your peace. You realized that needing closure from someone who never respected your presence was just reopening a wound that needed to scar, that the respect you wanted from them had to start with you. And respect doesn't beg, it walks. So you let go, not because they made it easier, but because they never would. You let go in silence. You didn't send one last message. You didn't write a paragraph to explain your pain. You didn't chase answers from someone who ran from questions. You simply chose yourself. And in that moment, The power shifted. You took back everything they thought they left in pieces. Because the truth is, closure is not something they give you. It's something you give yourself when you decide you're done, begging for clarity from people who are comfortable with your confusion. When you decide that being brave doesn't always look like standing in front of someone asking why. Sometimes it looks like walking away without a sound and never looking back. Seneca said, "He who is brave is free." And freedom came the moment you stopped needing them to make it make sense. The moment you stopped waiting for a goodbye. You didn't get closure from their words. You created it with your silence. That's real power. That's real healing. Drop this affirmation in the comments if you had to close the door yourself. They left it open. I chose to shut it. Number 4, you didn't disappear. You evolved beyond recognition. They thought you disappeared, that you went ghost, that maybe you were still stuck, still broken, still checking their profile in the dark. But the truth is, you didn't disappear. You evolved. Quietly, without warning, without a farewell speech or a dramatic exit. You didn't slam the door. You simply outgrew the room. The version of you who waited for a reply, gone. The one who kept giving without receiving, who stayed loyal to someone who didn't even understand what loyalty meant, buried in the silence they left you with. You didn't fade, you focused. You didn't fall off. You leveled up, mentally, physically, emotionally. You stopped explaining yourself. You stopped overthinking their distance. You stopped twisting yourself into shapes just to fit into their comfort zone. And in that stillness, you discovered who you really were. Someone who doesn't need chaos to feel connection. Someone who doesn't confuse attention with affection. Someone who doesn't return to a place just because it once felt like home. They don't recognize you anymore, and they're not supposed to. You've become someone new, someone who doesn't send that text, who doesn't check if they're online, who doesn't revisit the past hoping it will apologize. You don't engage in wars where the opponent is silence. You simply walk away, head high, heart guarded, purpose intact. And while they scroll through old memories, thinking maybe you're still out there wondering what went wrong, you're out here building something real with yourself. You're reading more, lifting heavier, smiling without pretending. You're surrounded by people who match your energy, not drain it. And you're no longer proving you're worthy of staying. You're becoming someone worth growing with, because that silence they gave you, it wasn't rejection, it was redirection. It gave you the space to become the man they never imagined you could be without them. That's what evolution looks like. Not loud, not chaotic, but powerful. As Marcus Aurelius said, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be one." And that's exactly what you're doing. You didn't lose yourself. You just shed the parts of you that tolerated being misunderstood. Number 5. You were the safe place. Now they're lost. They didn't realize what they had when they had you. You were the calm presence in a world full of chaos. The one who answered their late-night doubts with reassurance. The one who held space for them when they didn't even know how to hold space for themselves. You never asked for much, just honesty, just respect, just a little consistency. And when they gave you less, you gave them understanding. You gave without demanding. You loved without needing applause. You were the safe place, and they took it for granted. They confused your emotional discipline for passivity. They mistook your peaceful energy for predictability. They thought love was supposed to feel like a roller coaster, not a sunrise. So they left, searching for something more exciting, something different. But what they found was noise, temporary highs, surface-level connections, empty compliments that never knew their soul the way you did. Now they're surrounded by people who only show up when it's easy, who listen just enough to respond, not to understand, who vanish the moment things get complicated. They traded emotional safety for shallow validation, and every time they laugh without depth, every time they sit in a room full of people and still feel alone, they remember what it felt like to be seen by you. Really seen, completely held. You didn't become their piece by accident. That kind of strength is forged through the fire of heartbreak, through sleepless nights, through the choice to respond with grace when bitterness would have been easier. You didn't scream when they walked away. You didn't chase. You just stepped back and let the silence say what words couldn't. Seneca once said, "No man was ever wise by chance, and your wisdom, it came at a cost." You learned that some people aren't looking for stability, they're looking for stimulation, and when the thrill fades, they remember the one place they never had to pretend, the one place that didn't need fixing, the one place that felt like home. Now they're lost. Not because you left them behind, but because they left behind the only person who truly saw them. And they'll keep looking. But peace, like yours, it doesn't show up twice. Number 6. Your silence turned confusion into clarity. You used to stare at your phone like it held answers, reread old messages like they were sacred texts, obsess over pauses in conversations, wonder if you were too much or not enough. You weren't looking for drama. You were looking for meaning, some clue in the chaos that could explain why someone you gave everything to gave you silence in return. At first, the silence was unbearable, a question mark with no end. You thought maybe they were just busy, maybe they needed space, maybe you misunderstood, so you gave grace, you gave time, you gave chances. But the more you waited, the more you realized this wasn't about misunderstandings, this was about priorities, and you were never theirs. Silence became your teacher. It didn't shout, but it told the truth. They didn't forget to respond. They chose not to. They didn't lose interest overnight. They just lost the ability to pretend. And that hurt. Not because of what they did, but because of what it revealed. That you had been holding on to someone who was already letting go. So you made a decision not to lash out, not to demand closure, but to remove yourself from the equation entirely. You stopped asking why. You stopped checking for signs. You stopped explaining yourself to someone who didn't value the explanation. And in that stillness, something unexpected happened. Clarity. You saw the situation without the fog of emotion. You understood that silence isn't always passive. Sometimes it's a loud declaration. I'm done waiting for someone to see my worth. Your silence became sacred, a form of self-respect, a refusal to play a game with unclear rules. You stopped pouring energy into confusion and started directing it into yourself, the gym, the journal, the solitude, and what they thought was your weakness, your quiet, became the strongest part of you. Epictetus once said, "Freedom is the only worthy goal in life." And your freedom came the moment you stopped needing an ending from someone who never truly began. You no longer crave a response. You no longer need an apology. You found clarity in the very space they tried to leave you lost in. Number 7. You chose not to play the same game twice. They thought you'd return eventually, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday, when the pain softened, when the silence grew too loud, when loneliness crept back in, they thought you'd break the silence, that you'd reach out, just like before. A check-in, a memory, a reminder that they still lived rent-free in your heart. Because they assumed this was a pause, not a finale. They didn't know you'd outgrown the entire script. But you weren't on standby. You were evolving. You weren't waiting for the cycle to restart. You were breaking it, because the last time nearly cost you your sanity. You played your role with everything you had: kindness, patience, honesty, and it still wasn't enough. Not because you lacked anything, but because they weren't built to receive something real. They didn't recognize value because they were too busy chasing distractions. So you chose silence, not out of bitterness, but out of growth. Not because you didn't feel anything, but because you finally respected your own energy. They mistook your peace for passivity, your distance for defeat. But this wasn't weakness. This was a decision, a boundary drawn in steel. You've seen how they handle love. You've watched them run when it gets real, retreat when it gets deep. And now, you love yourself too much to relive it. You won't dance in a loop where every ending is predictable and every beginning is a lie. You didn't stop caring. You started caring smarter. You realized that love doesn't mean chasing someone who never learned how to stay. It means protecting the parts of you they once took for granted. It means letting the silence speak for itself, because silence says, "I've healed past the need to be understood by someone who never tried." Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." And your thoughts now, they don't echo regret. They don't replay old moments. They're focused on peace, on forward motion, on purpose. You're not bitter, you're better, not wounded, wiser. You're not playing the same game twice, because real growth doesn't loop, it climbs. And while they still chase familiarity, you're building a life they'll only see from the outside. They'll think about it. Maybe not now, but later, when the noise fades, when the thrill wears off, when they sit in a room full of people and still feel alone. That's when your silence will hit them. You don't need to explain anything. Your absence is enough. Because while they looked for distractions, you looked inward. While they avoided truth, you stood in it. And in the end, the one who walks away quietly is always the one who wins. If this message hit home, like it, share it with someone who's been silent for too long, and subscribe for more Stoic truths that cut through the noise.